is Manmeet, and I represent EMURGO. So EMURGO is the commercial and venture arm for the Cardano project. And I'm going to give you a little flavor of what we've been doing at EMURGO to drive adoption of our blockchain, and also sort of a snapshot of what our perspective is on this entire sort of ecosystem, what we're trying to build. So at the outset, EMURGO has two objectives, which is what we define all our activities under. So one is driving the adoption of Cardano, and the other one is driving value to ADA holders, ADA being name of our token. So if we look at the first objective in terms of driving adoption of Cardano, a couple of examples of what we've done. So one thing, we do it through direct investments. And the direct investments are both in early stage ventures, which I'll talk about a little later, but also in sort of more mature or new ventures that are being built and created by very experienced folks. So one example of that is Y2X. Y2X is a US-based entity. You can think of it almost like it's an investment bank for the security token space. We're very big believers in the security token space. Having said that, maybe I should qualify one little thing. When we talk about security tokens and the narrative that everybody talks about in terms of security tokens, they've restricted the narrative, as far as I've heard so far, to simply tokenizing assets, i.e., here's another digital instrument that represents a certain security somewhere. I think that's a very, very limited, shallow view of the space. When we talk about security tokens, our perspective is not just tokenizing the security or having another digital instrument, but actually leveraging blockchain to be able to actually see the entire life cycle of the asset and see the cash flows of the asset or the financials of the asset, all the way from origination through, say, even securitization of that financial asset. So having a security token that allows you to not only hold that economic interest in that security, but also allows you to have real-time direct sight on the financials of that asset and its entire history, all being recorded on a blockchain, is what I think is actually the real powerful story of where security tokens ought to be going. So Y2X is founded by the co-founders of Guggenheim Partners, Todd Morley, and we've invested in them to try and build up a security token narrative for infrastructure projects. So we're not talking about security tokens for early stage ventures, but we're talking global infrastructure projects which come into the realm of project finance, for instance. So we're talking about ports, we're talking about roads, we're talking about airports, we're talking about smart city initiatives, and so on and so forth. So that's one initiative. In terms of early stage ventures and how do we sort of promote the adoption of blockchain in that, we set up a joint venture with SOSV, which is a $650 million venture capital fund that only does accelerators. So we started and partnered with them, and we started their first blockchain accelerator, where EMURGO brings in the blockchain capabilities and expertise. SOSV brings in the accelerator expertise, and we invest in about 10 to 12 companies a year. We run 2 cohorts based out of New York. This is on site. The teams globally come to New York, spend 3 months with us. We run them through an entire acceleration cycle. And we finished our first batch. We have a few companies like HelixWorks, Tesseract, Cadillac, and Sempo that were in the first batch, and we just started our second batch. And all these companies, they're doing different interesting things. I'll give you just a couple examples. For instance, HelixWorks is an interesting startup. What they have is they have a DNA-based formulation that if you were to, say, for instance, spray it onto an apple or onto any physical asset, it provides a DNA sort of fingerprint equivalent onto that asset. Now, if you use then various IoT technologies to actually physically track that asset and have that entire set of transactions and movement recorded in blockchain, now you have a very interesting supply chain provenance or tracking mechanism that leverages both IoT and blockchain. In terms of, say, Sempo, for instance, this is about running philanthropy and charity onto a blockchain. They've been working together with the UN. They've had several successful projects across the world where they provide that much needed transparency into philanthropic efforts and fundraising, especially in the case, for instance, when you're looking at refugees and refugees getting funding and support at refugee camps and so on and so forth. How do you solve for that? That's what they've been working on. We also aren't exclusive to just looking at our closed ecosystem. Our philosophy is to focus on growing the adoption of blockchain across the board. The market that we're in today is really small. Whatever we talk about, whatever ego and impression we have about ourselves, the reality of the matter is blockchain adoption is still very minimal. The size of our industry is still very small. We have massive potential, but we're nowhere near critical scale. So in this example, given how we believe the transparency aspect of philanthropy and charity work and so on being a critical narrative, we've partnered with Binance and supported some of their projects. This particular Pink Care token project is a transparent effort where for, don't quote me on the number, I could be wrong, but I think it's something like $4.8 a year. You can support one girl in Africa to have a year's supply of sanitary pads. Now, any of you who are familiar with the social context in Africa and the social stigma and problem that the lack of sanitary pads poses to young girls all across Africa, you would understand how powerful having such a solution, having the ability to say, look, we've put X amount of BTC or fiat or whatever into this project, and you can actually track and see everything. How much money came into the project, who were the vendors, who got how much, what was received, where was it dispersed, the entire life cycle. Another thing that we strongly believe about is education. So again, this is coming back to this whole philosophy of increasing the adoption of blockchain and getting to some critical scale. So most projects right now, successful, or the ones that are in process of being successful and so on, they're hampered by one thing. If you're going to get to critical scale levels, you need a lot of developers. A lot of our projects, we've got great 5, 10, 15, 20 brilliant developers, engineering minds, scientists, whatever have you, but that's never going to be enough to do at-scale application for enterprises, for governments, where you require hundreds of people. I mean, if you take a telco, you take a bank, you take an FMCG company, you take any other entity out there, they've got literally hundreds of people who are developers or on their IT team for their software systems and processes and so on, and then you have all these other IT outsourcing companies and system integrators and so on who have hundreds of people as well. Now, and thousands really. So there's no way that in our industry, for us to reach that critical scale, we're going to survive or be successful with just a few, handful of developers per blockchain and so on. So our efforts here in EMURGO Academy is to create this army of developers coming out of universities that are skilled on blockchain technologies. This year, over the next 6 odd months, we would finish training about 3,000 students in India. Partnerships with universities, training computer scientists there, or students who are doing the computer science program, and over the years we'll be adding on to that. We have a program for experienced professionals as well, in terms of upskilling them in blockchain coding skills. We also have a customized program that's for larger organizations. We can provide sort of customized specific training solutions for their teams. Another element that we need to focus on is the regulatory side. So I don't know if any of you heard Perry-Ann Boring's presentation earlier today. We're on the Executive Council of Chamber of Digital Commerce, the largest lobby institution in the US for this digital asset world. We're also founding members of Blockchain for Europe, which is an association in collaboration with the European Parliament that is pushing for legislation and regulation that is pro-blockchain ecosystem. So we're trying to, and also the FinTech Indonesia. So through these efforts and these partnerships, we're actively and aggressively involved in trying to drive the narrative at the legislation and regulation side of things so that we can open up that pathway for the technology and innovation to kind of deliver the results that we're looking for. Now, in terms of the second objective, providing value to our token holders, that translates effectively to providing liquidity. We're actively, engaged with exchanges and markets out there, and that's not just an EMURGO thing. That's our, ecosystem, so our EMURGO ecosystem has, sorry, the Cardano ecosystem has EMURGO as the commercial and venture arm. It has IOHK as the development arm. They're the ones who built the protocol and continue to build it. And then we have the Cardano Foundation that's doing a lot more sort of community management, regulatory relationships, et cetera, et cetera. But between the three organizations, we're very deeply integrated and coordinated so that our efforts don't overlap, but they actually synergize and drive the results that we're looking for. So a lot of these regulatory, exchange relationships also have the foundation, for instance, as a partner. The other one is that we've partnered with several institutions, Metaps in Korea. They've got about 38,000 merchants across Korea that accept crypto payments. ADA's integrated into that. We recently announced this partnership with the Tamura franchise restaurant in Japan, or the Hotel Palm Royal Naha, et cetera, et cetera. These are those low-hanging fruit relationships that we're constantly trying to build up to drive some, value, liquidity, movement, traction for ADA being used as a payment token. And we will keep adding on to this. Now, the last element of what we're doing at EMURGO is this. We have a brilliant in-house tech team. They're very well integrated and coordinated with IOHK, so they're fully aware of what's going on in terms of the milestones and development of the Cardano project. And they've gone ahead and built a whole lot of tools that can be used for the community. So for instance, Yoroi is a light web-based wallet that has become, I think, probably the leading wallet for ADA that was developed by EMURGO with support from the Cardano Foundation. Seiza is a blockchain explorer developed by the EMURGO team, again supported by the Cardano Foundation, and both of these also coordinated with help and support from IOHK. And then Tangata Manu, for instance, is an open source code base for developers to go out there and leverage what we've already built to go and build their own wallets, blockchain explorers, and so on. So effectively, what we're talking about now is that we've got education to build a talent pool. We're having investments in mature entities that would drive that enterprise at scale adoption. We're trying to do it at the innovation level through investments in accelerators. We've got our own tech team that's building products and services as an example of what could be done with Cardano, so that brings in a lot of the developer community to make it easier for them to then build above and beyond what we could do in-house. So these are some of the activities that we do. I am out of time, so I'll stop here. Open for any questions you have.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one question. I'm seeing hand down there.
Hi, and thank you. I wanted to ask you very quickly, what do you feel is the biggest roadblock to the mass adoption of Cardano? Is it the price volatility?
The mass adoption of Cardano or blockchain in general?
In general, but since you work with Cardano, I would love to hear your opinion on that as well.
Well, there are elements of our product development that are to be released. So until that's done, which is happening right now as we speak, in the next, very soon we'll get to a major milestone in terms of our decentralization strategy, and then early next year we'll have another milestone in relation to our smart contract strategy. So that's one thing regarding Cardano, but really across blockchain, there are a lot of issues in terms of why we don't have this mass adoption. One, blockchain at the end of the day today is still a fairly inefficient method for enterprise plays. It's slow, it's cumbersome, it's a pain in the ass to integrate with existing systems. Enterprises are not large, and when I'm talking about enterprise, I'm talking about the large enterprises, right? Large enterprises are not the most innovative in terms of upending their entire systems to bring in a new technology, no matter how awesome it sounds. The question is, how well do you integrate this new innovative technology into existing systems, and you're able to then sort of help them grow up this sort of learning curve of using the new technology, being comfortable with it, so that they're confident that their existing processes and business processes aren't hampered or hindered in any way, right? So that's one. Another one, in terms of, say, when we're looking at financial services, which is one of the low-hanging fruits for blockchain, it's regulatory, right? We don't have regulatory clarity in the major economies in the world. We are getting there step by step. We're all working towards that, but we don't have it. We have smaller nations that have taken a large leap, shall we say, in terms of being very clear and open about bringing in blockchain as a tool for improvements in financial services and security tokens and so on and so forth. But they aren't the ones that are the money centers of the world. At the end of the day, when you think about money centers, it's still the US or Europe. And until we're clear here, you're not going to have that big institutional money adoption happening that would drive the market value of our entire industry, right? Then the third one is just talent, right? Like I said, you can't do a large enterprise deployment and ongoing maintenance without having the talent behind it. We need those thousands and thousands of soldiers. I kind of call them like the soldiers, the army of the blockchain coding world. We have a lot of generals and brilliant generals and so on, but we don't have the army below it that actually does the work, you know what I mean, at scale, and does the maintenance and stuff like that, right? So off the top of my head, these would be about 3 things.
So thank you very much.
Thanks.